Greetings. My name is Jesse P. Karlsberg, and I'm the editor-in-chief and project director of the Sounding Spirit Initiative. I want to just take a moment to thank the organizers of this 2020 meeting of the Hymn Society for their work in putting together such an exciting program, and especially for the effort that I know went into making it possible for us to convene virtually in this really extraordinary and challenging time. I'm also grateful to all of the members of the Sounding Spirit project team who are joining us in this session for their participation. I know you all enjoy meeting them in just a moment. And I'm excited to introduce our initiative's scholarly editions to you all. So a word about Sounding Spirit. Sounding Spirit is a research lab and a publishing initiative that promotes collaborative engagement with the songbooks that sound America's musical landscape. Our initiative publishes editions of historic Southern vernacular sacred song to make accessible to scholars, teachers, and practitioners the works of hymnody that mediate race, place, and religion in American history. Our project marries historical hymnody with digital innovation in annotated facsimile editions and thematic collections of sacred vernacular songbooks. We publish print editions of these otherwise inaccessible texts, and Sounding Spirit also leverages the Redux platform to publish digital editions that are freely accessible on the web. Sounding Spirit also hosts, as I mentioned, thematic collections of digitized songbooks and uses the Redux platform for this so that singers and scholars can interact with a broader range of sacred vernacular American music books than those represented by our scholarly editions. And what I'm showing here is the first of these collections in our pilot digital library, which just launched in April of 2020. So these are all accessible now on the web, and as you can see, you can access them just at library.soundingspirit.org, so we encourage you to do that. Our sectional today, though, will showcase the 5 scholarly editions in our series. These 5 works represent periods, places, and genres key to illustrating the importance of vernacular songbooks to the history of American sacred music. The first round of the series features books published between 1850 and 1925. And the editions feature black and white gospel songs, spirituals, reformed tunes that set Cherokee language hymns, and shape note music. Sounding Spirit pioneers a unique approach to scholarly editing that weds digital innovation with rigorous research. Each Sounding Spirit edition includes an introduction. It includes annotations on the page level, so on elements of any given page in a book, ranging from musical notes to portions of a hymn text that shed light on the details of the text construction, circulation, use, and cultural context. And the project also includes data visualizations that shed light on the volume level to the context and the significance of the work. And these editions are published in digital and in print form by the University of North Carolina Press and the Emory Center for Digital Scholarship. These 5 sacred songbooks refract historical events such as the Trail of Tears, the Civil War, the rise of the New South, and the early waves of the Great Migration, through diverse and in many ways marginalized perspectives that nonetheless are significant to understanding these historical events and how they relate to religion and music making during the 19th and 20th centuries. These books represent the sacred music making of Black, white, and Native American Southerners and those displaced to then Indian territory and to cities across the United States. In accessible, innovative editions, these works have the potential to change the way that researchers, teachers, and members of the public access and understand music's relationship to American religion and history. So we'll now hear more about these works from the scholars working on them, working on these exciting editions in the Sounding Spirit Initiative. So thank you again for joining us. And I'll turn it over to our volume editors who I'll introduce before they share a bit about their work with you. As editor-in-chief, I am pleased that 4 of our 5 editorial teams will speak about the historical songbook that is the subject of their Sounding Spirit edition as part of this sectional. First, we'll hear from Sara Snyder. Sara Snyder is Assistant Professor of Anthropology and Director of the Cherokee Language Program at Western Carolina University. An accomplished ethnomusicologist with long-standing ties to the Eastern Band of Cherokees, Dr. Snyder's research explores the poetics, performance, and translation of Cherokee, specifically within the context of language revitalization. I'm only just getting to know Sara through her work on her Sounding Spirit edition of the Cherokee Singing Book from 1846, and I'm pleased to be introducing her today.
In this video, I'm going to talk about the Cherokee Singing Book, a critical edition for Sounding Spirit. I'm the volume editor. My name is Sara Snyder Hopkins. I direct the Cherokee Language Program at Western Carolina University, which is in the Department of Anthropology and Sociology. I teach Cherokee language classes and linguistic anthropology classes. I have a PhD in ethnomusicology from Columbia University, where I also did substantial coursework in linguistic anthropology, and also at NYU University. I taught music and art at New Gadua Academy, the Cherokee Language Immersion School, which is operated by the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians in North Carolina from 2011 to 2016, and this was the subject of my dissertation research. Other team members for this project include Hartwell Francis, the curriculum developer at the Katua Preservation and Education Program in Cherokee, North Carolina, Alexa Little, Yale Linguistics BA, and most importantly, fluent speakers, notably Wiggins Black Fox and Tom Belt have worked on this project, and others will also be working on this project. The Cherokee Singing Book is printed in the Cherokee language. It contains a rudiment section that was adapted from portions of Lowell Mason's choir and his manual of the Boston Choral Academy. It's one of the few texts ever created that explain Western musical theory concepts in a Native American language. The singing book also includes 122 hymns, based largely on Mason's collections with a few outliers. Since the Cherokee Singing Book draws most of its material from Mason's publications, it follows his textual conventions, including 4-line SATB harmony and standard round note heads. Mason was largely responsible for the abandonment of shape note singing techniques across the Northeast, but the tradition became entrenched across the American South, much to his distaste. Had there been a shape note edition, the singing book may have had a much wider circulation. Less than 1,000 copies of the Cherokee Singing Book were published for use by the Congregationalist Mission Church, now Presbyterian, in what is present-day Park Hill, Oklahoma. The text was never reprinted, and the only remaining original copies are housed in a handful of archives. Despite the text's limited circulation during the 19th century, it is a valuable repository of Cherokee language, and a reprint, with digital translation and annotations, will give the text a new life and purpose in contemporary Cherokee language revitalization initiatives. The singing book text was organized by Congregationalist missionary Samuel Austin Worcester and translated by Cherokee minister Stephen Foreman. Worcester approached David Green, secretary of the American Board for the Commission of Foreign Missions, to have the singing book printed in Boston by a printer with musical type. Green solicited the help of Lowell Mason for editing and preparing the text for print. Considering that Samuel Worcester did not speak Cherokee, Stephen Foreman is the true translator and voice of the Cherokee Singing Book. Whereas accounts of Worcester's life are fairly extensive due to the large volume of correspondence that was preserved by the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions and other archival sources, there is less primary source information about Foreman. In providing a translation of the Cherokee text, this edition seeks to recenter Foreman's Cherokee voice as critical to the genesis and creative spirit of the Cherokee Singing Book. The structure of the edited volume will include a historical introduction article that situates the text in the post-removal era, which occurred after 1838. It will also, of course, have the reprint of the original text, one of the challenges of which will be working with Cherokee syllabary font. And finally, we will have the meat of the project in the digital content, which will include a 3 or possibly 4-line interlineal gloss for all the text, as well as annotations of important linguistic, historical, and musical features using the Redux platform, and other multimedia content such as recordings of the hymns. The Cherokee Singing Book stands unique among other hymn books printed during the 19th century. The text was created during a period following mass disenfranchisement, displacement, and wide-scale social upheaval in the Cherokee Nation and United States. Thus, the book's social history is unlike any other singing book of this era. Christian hymns have been printed in numerous other native languages, but Cherokee is alone for having such texts printed in its own non-glyphic writing system, the Cherokee syllabary, which was introduced by George Sequoyah Guess in the early 1820s. Here is an example of an interlineal gloss with sample annotations. This is the hymn tune Cambia by Lowell Mason. Cambia is a district in Africa. However, this tune was retitled Elewodiyi in Cherokee, which means painted place, and that was the name for Red Clay, Tennessee, which was in the ancestral homelands of the Cherokee people. It was also the final seat of the Cherokee Council before removal in 1838. There are several notes we can make about spellings and variations here as well. And what's interesting about this hymn text is that it's not overtly religious. The Cherokee text has no connection with the English language text that's associated with this hymn. And in retitling this hymn in Cherokee, Elewodiyi, Stephen Foreman takes creative license with the convention of titling tunes after places important to composers. Foreman and his family were strongly opposed to removal. Thus, this text reads almost as a heartbreaking elegy for a lost homeland. And it translates as, I will find my heart where it was rested here on earth. Or I will find my heart where I left it here on earth. So it has this kind of elegiac overtone to it. So this is just a small example of the kind of information we can pull out from doing these kinds of translations with the gloss and comparing it to the original hymn texts as well. So to wrap up, we might ask, what is the value of doing a reprint or a critical edition of this volume that experienced such small circulation in its initial printing? Well, one of the major uses of this is for Cherokee language documentation and revitalization. There are fewer than 1,000 first language speakers remaining in North Carolina and Oklahoma. That's 1,000 first language speakers in the whole world of this language. But both tribes have invested millions of dollars toward language revitalization. They're very serious about trying to keep their languages alive. So this text can be used for language study and for renewing or adding to existing hymn singing practices in those communities. The translation also makes the text useful to linguists and other scholars who are working with the Cherokee language, and there's quite a few. And finally, the explanations and translations will make it possible for people who are not experts of the Cherokee language to work with the text. And this would be things like community choirs or university choirs that want to integrate native texts into their repertoires.
Sandra Jean Graham is Associate Professor of Music at Babson College. Dr. Graham is the author of Spirituals and the Birth of a Black Entertainment Industry, published in 2018 by the University of Illinois Press. Dr. Graham served from 2017 to 2019 as president of the Society for American Music. She's currently serving as its past president. In addition to her Sounding Spirit edition of The Story of the Jubilee Singers with Their Songs of 1875, Sandy is working on an edition of Spirituals for the Music of the United States of America series. I've gotten to know Sandy through our shared involvement in the Society for American Music, and I'm delighted to introduce her to you today.
The story of the Jubilee Singers is well known for chronicling the career of the Fisk Jubilee Singers, who were from Nashville, Tennessee, and it's also well known as the first anthology of arranged spirituals ever published. The scores were prepared by church musician and music editor Theodore F. Seward, taken down from the singing of the church choir. And Seward was a music editor, church organist, choir director, and eventually became manager of the Fisk Jubilee Singers. The goal of this Sounding Spirit edition is to examine how the story of the Jubilee Singers intersects with other genres of literature at the time, specifically religious literature such as tracts and gospel hymnals, abolitionist and civil rights literature, anthologies of parlor music and national song, and travelogues. But it will also include annotations of the spirituals at the end of the volume. Between 1872 and 1903, approximately 35 editions of the Fisk narrative and spirituals were published. That averages to over one edition a year. The book was published in the United States, Great Britain, and the Netherlands, with the entire chronicle as well as the spirituals translated into Dutch. And it ultimately sold 150,000 copies. The narratives were written successively by Gustavus D. Pike and J.B.T. Marsh, who were white missionaries, and Jubilee singer Frederick Loudon. So the first question was, which publication to use for the Sounding Spirit edition? And you can see that I have put a little bookmark there on this slide for 1875. And I want to explain why I ultimately chose this edition to discuss. This 1875 edition was prepared by J.B.T. Marsh. It was the first one that he edited, and it was a revision of Pike's publication from earlier that year. Both of these books covered the Jubilee Singers' concert tours of Great Britain. By 1875, the book was on its way to becoming a classic, with 25,000 copies sold by 1876. But why pick this particular edition? There are three main reasons. Number one, the Jubilee Singers were midway through their career at this time and at the height of their success. The managers were confident that two separate English language narratives published in the same year would find an audience both in the United States and abroad. This would never happen again. Second, by 1875, Jubilee Songs was no longer the sole source of written concert spirituals. The primary competition was Hampton Institute's Cabin and Plantation Songs, which came out in 1874 and were notated by their director, Thomas P. Fenner. But in addition, there were numerous other Jubilee troupes who were touring and gaining in popularity and beginning to issue their own versions of spirituals. Marsh's edition reflects an awareness of these rival troupes and these further developments. And finally, and this is what I want to focus on in this short presentation, there was Jubilee singer Ella Shepherd. She served as assistant director, soprano, and pianist. And she went on to transcribe 11 of the spirituals in Marsh's 1875 edition. Nonetheless, she remains uncredited for her work. So this becomes an opportunity to highlight the invisibility of women's labor in transmitting official histories of the Jubilee Singers. So, as a brief example of the kind of annotations I'm interested in, I'd like to consider today two spirituals that Ella Shepherd transcribed at the request of Theodore Seward. The first is Way Over Jordan, and the second is The Angels Changed My Name. Way Over Jordan, which is on the left of your screen here, is the first song that Ella Shepherd ever transcribed. And she did it about a month after the Jubilee Singers arrived in England in May 1874. In her diary, she noted, quote, "I did not make a single mistake. When I took it to Mr. Seward, my heart fairly fluttered with something, I don't know what. I was so rejoiced when it was found correct." End quote. You note her eagerness to please. She was an accomplished pianist and musician. She certainly had the ability to make this kind of transcription. And you might note that its four-part tonal harmony follows the pattern that had been firmly established by earlier spirituals in the Fisk repertory, which Seward himself had transcribed. What's interesting to me is what Shepherd says about the other spiritual shown here, The Angels Changed My Name. Now, you might think that transcribing four-part harmony would be more challenging than transcribing only a melody. And yet, Shepherd's diary entry for July 20th notes, quote, "the first really hard one I've had," end quote. Unfortunately, that's the sum total of what she says, leaving us to read between the lines. So, what could have been challenging about this particular spiritual? Well, let's look at the B flat in the second measure, which is circled in the score. Maybe that wasn't a true B flat, it could have been a microtone. So no matter how Shepherd heard it, such a lowered pitch didn't really fit into the key signature, which presumed a diatonic scale. And just as a side note, by this time Seward had been assigning key signatures to all his transcriptions, whether they used 4, 5, 6, or all 7 of the diatonic scale degrees. Another challenge was likely rhythm, especially where two pitches are assigned to one word, as indicated by the squares on the score. Was the singer consistent in performing these? Was the first note rendered as a grace? Did the two notes represent a slide? Was there some other kind of ornamentation going on here? These are all things that could have happened. And then if we take a look in line 3 in the first measure, we have the two notes of E going to C on the word changed. But let's compare that with the same gesture in the second to the last line where we have D going to C. Was that a purposeful change in pitch, or was that pitch not so easy to hear? This suggests another potential challenge in identifying absolute pitches in this melody. Unlike her diary notations for the other 9 spirituals she notated, Shepherd doesn't mention that Seward pronounced the particular transcription correct. And perhaps he never checked it, or did so only hurriedly, as it comes at the end of the book, just as it was about to go to press. And he also didn't seem to notice that all of the systems are connected, so it appears like one grand staff. And this was a mistake that persisted in all later editions of Jubilee songs. Despite the enormous attention that scholars have devoted to Jubilee songs, I hope this short presentation convinces you that there's more to be learned, and I look forward to delving into it. I'm just at the start of this particular journey. So I'd welcome questions and feedback. Please feel free to email me, and thanks so much for your time today.
Kevin Kerberg is a professor of music and chair of the Department of Music at Warren Wilson College, and author of a forthcoming book on gospel composer Albert E. Brumley. The preeminent scholar of A.J. Showalter's life and work, Kevin is uniquely suited to edit class, choir, and congregation, published in 1888 for Sounding Spirit, I've known Kevin for years through our shared connections to the University of Kentucky's Ron Penn and the Shape Note singing world. I'm delighted to have Kevin share his research with the Hymn Society today.
Hi, my name is Kevin Karlsberg, and I'm one of the volume editors in Sounding Spirit's upcoming series of scholarly editions. First, I want to just thank everyone for the opportunity to present with this terrific panel at the Hymn Society's 2020 conference. I was excited to hear that the conference made plans to have a virtual convening, and I'm grateful to be a part of it. Thank you. So the volume I'm editing is an edition of Class, Choir, and Congregation, first published in 1888 by the A.J. Showalter Company, headquartered in Dalton, Georgia. Class, Choir, and Congregation was one of the most popular and influential shape note tune books of the late 19th century. And its publication paralleled watershed moments in the history of the South and the broader U.S. during the Gilded Age, including unrest over Reconstruction, railroad expansion and industrialization, the shifting economic and sectional identities of the New South, and the emerging social gospel movement. From a musicological perspective, Class, Choir, and Congregation also represents this critical link marking the transition from the dispersed harmony shape note books of the first half of the 19th century, books like the Sacred Harp and the Christian Harmony, toward the annual gospel songbooks popular in the early decades of the 20th century. Now, I'd like to just show you the cover of this particular tune book. And there it is. So this book was a commercial success, reportedly selling 400,000 copies within its first 25 years. The original publication paired 277 numbered selections in 4-part harmony, along with a substantial 80-page preface that included pedagogical rudiments, musical exercises for students, and additional sacred and sentimental part songs. This array of potential applications contributed to the collection's popularity, but the variety of music in the book was also important to its success. It included many examples of gospel songs and revival hymns, these two related styles that combined the sentimentality of Sabbath school hymnody with musical influences from contemporary American popular music, including operettas, vaudeville, marches, parlor songs, minstrel theater repertoire. So these secular influences had popular appeal, and I'm excited to work on this book and explore the ways that such influences represented complex associations with intersecting racial, sectional, religious, and working class dynamics that these singing communities were negotiating during this time. Operettas and parlor songs signified this sort of elite aesthetic imported from the North, while vaudeville and minstrelsy were secular, worldly, and influenced by African American music making. So Class, Choir, and Congregation provided a vehicle for its communities of use to contend with the modern essence of these musical trends. The editor of Class, Choir, and Congregation was a gentleman named A.J. Showalter. Showalter was a Virginia native of German Anabaptist lineage in both Mennonite and Church of the Brethren circles, and his father was a prominent shape note singing school teacher in the Shenandoah Valley region. A.J. Showalter founded a company that eventually sold millions of songbooks and pioneered the soft-bound, octavo-sized annual publications of mostly new music that came to characterize 20th century gospel singing conventions. Class, Choir, and Congregation was the company's most successful book, and it kind of embodied this transition. To create it, Showalter essentially fused two of his previous publications into one robust volume. One was an instructional book called New Method for Singing Schools, and the other was an earlier tune book that he had published. So the result was this large, all-in-one resource that was an innovative response to the demands of modern singing communities. And it remained in regular use and circulation through at least the 1950s. Showalter initially published the book in an oblong form, redolent of older 19th century tune books like the Sacred Harp. But he later reformatted it into this upright octavo layout to keep pace with the trends of turn-of-the-century gospel songbook publishing. The book served as a crucial conduit for popularizing Northern revivalist gospel material among shape note singing communities in the South, but it was also the main source of some Showalter original hymns that have remained popular among white, Black, Native American churches in a variety of denominations and social settings. So, Leaning on the Everlasting Arms, for which Showalter wrote the music, is certainly the best known of these. I'd like to highlight another song, One by One We'll All Be Gathered Home. This is another Showalter original from this tune book that appeared in numerous subsequent publications and continues to be sung today from such shape note books as the Christian Harmony. So to conclude the presentation, I'd like to share a short video of a performance of this particular Showalter composition as an example of the repertoire in class, choir, and congregation. In the video, I'm joined by my wife, Sara Kerberg, to my right, her sister, Martha Coleman, to her right, along with their mother and my mother-in-law, Miriam Kratzer. So thank you very much. Hope you enjoy the song.
We are traveling to a better land. One by one we'll all be gathered home, and we'll trust the Savior's guiding hand. One by one we'll all be gathered home, gathering together. One by one we'll all be gathered home, gathering together. One by one we'll all be gathered home. There we'll meet our loved ones gone before. One by one we'll all be gathered home, and we'll dwell with Jesus evermore. One by one we'll all be gathered home, gathering together. One by one we'll all be gathered home, gathering together. One by one we'll all be gathered home. Come, my brother, join the happy throng. One by one we'll all be gathered home, singing now redemption's holy song. One by one we'll all be gathered home, gathering together. One by one we'll all be gathered home, gathering together. One by one we'll all be gathered home.
Finally, I'll introduce myself. In addition to serving as editor-in-chief and project director of Sounding Spirit, I am producing an edition of Original Sacred Harp, published in 1911, for Sounding Spirit. I am Senior Digital Scholarship Strategist at Emory University's Center for Digital Scholarship and Associated Faculty in the Department of Music. I'm also Project Director of Redux, a platform for annotating and publishing digital scholarly editions and thematic research collections that Sounding Spirit employs. I'm also a Sacred Harp singer, teacher, and composer. I serve as a member of the committee currently revising the Sacred Harp Tunebook and as vice president of the nonprofit Sacred Harp Publishing Company. I will now turn it over to myself. Greetings, this is Jesse P. Karlsberg again, and my Sounding Spirit volume is an edition of Original Sacred Harp, a 1911 shape note tune book edited by Atlanta lawyer and businessman Joseph Stephen James. Original Sacred Harp was the most popular and influential revision of the Sacred Harp, itself the most enduring of the many four-note tune books published in the first decades of the 19th century. In revising the Sacred Harp, James attempted to make what Southerners viewed as an archaic musical style relevant to 20th century audiences. My edition of Original Sacred Harp argues that the way James approached this task tells us a great deal about modernity, whiteness, and Christianity, both in the New South and today. The Sacred Harp was published in 1844 and compiled by West Georgians Benjamin Franklin White and Elisha James King. An oblong, hardbound tune book set in four-shape notation, the Sacred Harp adopted a bibliographic form then common across the U.S. South and West. Like many other compilers, White and King collected popular plain tunes and fuguing tunes from turn of the 19th century New England, early 19th century folk hymns from the mid-Atlantic states, and new arrangements of revival choruses that originated in racially diverse camp meetings of the early 19th century. The Sacred Harp was a success, selling over 100,000 copies in the decades around the Civil War, and spawning a new music culture characterized by interdenominational singing conventions that used the tune book. Yet, even before B.F. White's death in 1879, and particularly in the closing years of the 19th century, many singing conventions traded in their Sacred Harps for newer songbooks like class choir and congregation that employed more recent forms of music notation and teaching methods to suit the emerging gospel style. Yet a significant minority of singing conventions, including Black and white institutions, remained loyal to the Sacred Harp. By the turn of the 20th century, these singers explicitly embraced the tune book as a key element of their sacred music making. Yet many felt the tune book needed to be revised to remain relevant. 3 early 20th century editors, all white, produced revisions in response to this call. Each articulated an urge to make the book new again while retaining something of the old. James's original Sacred Harp was the last of these 3. James was born in rural West Georgia's Campbell County in 1849. At 26, he was elected the first mayor of Douglasville. A businessman and Democratic politician, he editorialized against the populists, served in the Georgia state legislature, and moved to Atlanta in 1892 as the U.S. District Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia. James was a typical member of the white middle-class group at the forefront of the political and economic campaign to reintegrate the South into the nation. This period of industrialization was powered by the political disenfranchisement of poor white and Black Southerners. James's revision of the Sacred Harp balanced musical conservatism with what he referred to as material modern improvement. He sought to bring the book up to the present through systematizing its presentation and modernizing its aesthetics. The tune book's front cover boasts all plates and everything new, and advertises that the book is just out August 1911. His introduction boasts of a new page design with historically researched music and hymn text attributions, scripture references, and additional hymn verses, all innovations modeled on contemporaneous gospel songbooks and hymnals. Yet these changes also suggest how James claimed contemporary relevance for original Sacred Harp by connecting the book to the past. In addition to updated attributions, James authored a historical note for each of the book's 578 songs. The historical note for Hallelujah illustrates how James connected songs in original Sacred Harp to 19th century tune book compilers like South Carolina's William Walker, and to 18th century dissenting hymnists of the British Isles like Charles Wesley. In tying early 20th century Atlanta to these times and places, James sought to present the tune book as venerable, historic, and sacred object. James's changes to original Sacred Harp also bound the interdenominational songbook to the Bible. In addition to adding scriptural references tying each song to a Bible verse, James directly asserted this connection on the songbook's back cover, writing that the book and its music and hymns are in accord and keeping with sacred music in the Bible, and going on to offer a biblical genealogy of that history. Original Sacred Harp also refracts James's status as a white New South booster, forward-moving yet consumed with anxiety about his position in the South's destabilizing racial hierarchy. In his preface, James distances original Sacred Harp songs from ragtime and jig melodies, terms that signaled Black and immigrant music to his contemporaries. Like many of his contemporaneous proponents of the lost cause ideology, James expressed nostalgia for the rural Georgia of his antebellum youth, Though James added new songs to original Sacred Harp, this nostalgia motivated him to retain all songs included in the previous edition of the Tunebook and to restore 2/3 of those that had been removed. This musical conservatism motivated the original in the book's title, Original Sacred Harp. James's relationship to these tunes also explains his otherwise confusing boast that the book contains standard melodies. For James, standard signaled that original Sacred Harp's music was part of the great body of hymnody rooted in Western civilization and the Bible, connecting the text to a time and place when hierarchies from which he benefited were more secure. James made the Tunebook modern by remaking it as a monument to the past. Sacred Harp singing is alive and well today. Still rooted in Georgia and Alabama as it was in James's day, the practice stretches across much of the United States and extends to another 24 countries. Singers today, as in James's time, value Sacred Harp as a contemporary practice with an important history. Re-examining how James navigated an evolving relationship to past and present gets at the heart of the Sounding Spirit Initiative. As a tunebook with a devoted community of practitioners, the original Sacred Harp tells an important story about the collision of race, religion, and modernity. Like all Sounding Spirit volumes, this edition traces both harmony and dissonance through an old music book. These sacred songs and their examination tell us a new story about American sacred music and this country's fraught history. Thank you.
Greetings. In this season that calls for deep reflection and renewed commitments to justice, Sounding Spirit turns again and again to the texts used for worship, lament, prayer, and protest. The sacred songbooks through which generations of Americans have made meaning, found comfort, and sounded the call to both religious expression and revolutionary action are at the heart of our work. We had hoped to share in an academic song circle with you today, highlighting these texts as both important sources for scholarly engagement and as living testaments to the power of voices raised individually and in community. While we are not able to sing together today, we are delighted to introduce each of our 5 volumes to the Hymn Society family. At this time, I'd like to thank all of our volume editors for their important contributions to the Sounding Spirit Initiative. Special thanks to Dr. Sara Snyder, Dr. Sandra Graham, Dr. Kevin Karlsberg, Dr. Emmett Price III, and Dr. Horace Maxiel, and Dr. Jessie Karlsberg. We are so very fortunate to be working with brilliant and innovative volume editors. The titles alone of each of our 5 scholarly editions invite questions we are exploring with our volume editors, our project team, and with a growing community of teachers, scholars, singers, and worship leaders that now includes you. How, for example, can we use the rudiments and teaching tools embedded in the Cherokee Singing Book to support contemporary language revitalization efforts? What stories are we telling about the Jubilee Singers and others tasked with translating and performing spirituals to audiences on both sides of the color line? How might Showalter's gospel music remind us about the ingatherings that spanned classes, choirs, and congregations during a transitional period in American sacred music? How will the scholarly engagement with Reverend C.A. Tinley's hymn writing echo into the souls of those steeped in the history, tradition, and practice of Black sacred music, and among those unfamiliar with its power? And what does it mean when editors of a volume like the Sacred Harp claim the mantle of originality at a particular place and time in a text's bibliographic history? Of course, we won't be able to answer those questions today, but we invite you to raise them with us. Each of our editions tells multiple stories, and we look forward to sharing them with you as our editorial teams continue their research and writing. While we are journeying today in spirit only, we welcome you into our growing community of scholars, practitioners, and worship leaders. In the coming months and years, Sounding Spirit will be making accessible the editions we explored today. We will also be digitizing hundreds of historical songbooks and making these works available through our digital library. And so at this time, we invite all Hymn Society members to come along for the journey. Perhaps you've been inspired to take a closer look at one of our edition texts. Perhaps you have a question for a project team member or one of our editors. We're especially interested in hearing about how you might make use of these print and digital editions. Is there a place for Sounding Spirit in your church or community? Please watch our social media channels and stay connected with us as we work toward the expansion of our digital library and the launch of all 5 edited volumes. My name is Meredith Doster, and I'm the managing editor and project manager of the Sounding Spirit Research Lab. It's my pleasure to hand the final baton to our project director, Jesse Karlsberg, who will appropriately close us out with a song.
Thank you, Meredith, for your work as project manager of Sounding Spirit and for that invitation to reach out. I do hope many of you will get in touch. As promised, we will close with a song. Sacred Harp singers close a day of singing with one of the dozens of songs in the Tunebook with a theme of parting. Such songs like Hallelujah, which we briefly examined in my introduction to original Sacred Harp, remind us that although we look forward to the next chance to sing together, we may not meet again here on earth. In a time of deep uncertainty, as always, the hope that, as the song says, we'll all sing hallelujah when we arrive at home, offers solace and inspiration to many. In this rendition, recorded by Alan Lomax in 1982, Alabama singer Lucy Marie Hydorn leads Hallelujah at the annual singing at Holly Springs Primitive Baptist Church in Bremen, Georgia. Thank you once again, and enjoy.
Lucy Hydorn.
146.
Glad to have you, madam.
Thank you. Mr. Smith.
Followed by Carl Hugh.
Oh,